democratic accountability and democratic decision-making is at the heart of what we do as a society. One of the reasons I'm here today was because I was extraordinarily frustrated with all those politicians who I thought were doing a useless job and I could do better. So I stood for election. It's up to you to decide how that's going. But I was very, very clear in my own mind that in any democracy, especially a young democracy in Wales, we need to have a way of voting, a system of elections that unifies the country and that where people feel that they have a real stake in the decisions that we take here. And one of the more depressing aspects quite often of fighting elections is the knowledge that turnout could be quite low unless you have all this huge media coverage you get from UK elections, that people don't fully appreciate and understand the issues which have been determined at this particular election, whether it's a local election or a Welsh election, and that people do not feel enfranchised, feel that they have that link, they have that power, if you like. And when I look at the decisions that we need to take here, when I look at the decisions that we're looking at taking as part of this reform process, what's driving me isn't a desire for experimentation in all sorts of different ways. What's driving me is to answer the question about what will strengthen our democracy as a country, as a people, and what will empower people. How do we make people more powerful in terms of what they're able to do to hold me and others to account and to determine the future of their own communities? Part of that, of course, is the structures of governance we have in Wales and the units of governance in Wales. I've said a number of times, as local government minister, I want to see more power going to local government from this place. You know, I didn't fight for devolution for most of my adult life in order to take powers from London, to hold them here in Cardiff Bay, and jealously guard those powers in the same way as some people do in Westminster. We need to look at how we can now pass power to local government and to enable people to take decisions, more decisions about the future of their communities, closer to those communities and within those communities. And fundamental for me to that argument about where power should reside is how, to whom is that power to be accountable. Now, I don't often quote Tony Benn. My colleagues in the Labour Party know that that's not the wing of a party that I've always felt most comfortable with. But some of you might remember the speech he made, an excellent speech, talking about the European Union, when he asked the 5 questions about democracy, about, on whose behalf do you exercise power, to whom are you accountable, and the final question, of course, is how do I get rid of you? An absolutely fundamental question. If we are making mistakes, or people don't believe in what we're doing as a government, they need to be able to get rid of us and replace us. Fundamental in a democracy. And they need to understand how that is done. And it needs to be, and that power needs to be capable of being exercised easily and without barriers being placed in people's way to exercise that power. So for me, this isn't a technical process in modernising the way we do elections because we now have more technology available to us. For me, this reform process is fundamentally a part of how we reform local government, because we're talking about local government elections here, but for me, the national elections we have in Wales should be run on the same basis. There's nothing I've announced in the last month which I wouldn't want to see exercised here for National Assembly elections, nothing at all. But it's how we can empower people, how we can enable people to exercise power. And so this is very much about reform of structures, but reform also of accountability. And I think that's a fundamental part of the importance in our society, in a democratic society. So I want to increase the franchise. We had a very clear commitment in our manifesto as a Labour Party that we would seek to increase the franchise and to enable 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. I think it's important that people are empowered in an early age. You know, those of us who have stood and stand for elections know that all too often elections are skewed towards older people because we know the older people will turn out in larger numbers of younger people. So we will talk all about issues which affect older people proportionately more. And we don't talk about the future of youth policy and youth centres because we think that young people don't vote as often. We need to change that. We have to change that. And I think that the 16 and 17-year-olds should have the right to vote and the right to exercise choice about the future of their communities. And I hope that we will be able to make that law in time for the next local elections. So I hope that we can enable people to feel a part of that franchise. But of course, enabling a 17-year-old to vote is not going to help a 21-year-old feel more enfranchised. You have to go further than that. And, you know, I'm not in favour of compulsory voting or that sort of thing, because I think it's up to people like myself and other politicians to inspire people, to give people the reason to vote, and to make people feel that their vote actually counts by listening to what people have to say, and also by ensuring that that our manifestos appeal to what people want to see in their communities. And a part of that is about inclusivity and a sense of cohesion in our communities. Do you know, one of my responsibilities in this role is that of justice policy. Now, justice policy is part of the overall devolution settlement that is not fully devolved. Parts of what we do in justice are devolved, but parts aren't. And that jagged edge to the settlement creates some very real problems for us. It creates problems for our communities, it creates problems for us, it creates problems for the UK government, actually, although they're less prone to accept that. And you know, when I was visiting last Thursday morning Swansea Prison, and talking to people there and chatting away to people who are currently imprisoned there, and many of them are serving relatively short sentences. Most people in our prison states are men between, say, 18 and 30, serving sentences of over a couple of years. Now, those people are coming back to live in our communities. I met two actually from Aberystwyth, and we'll be back in Aberystwyth in the next couple of years. Now, are we really saying that they don't have a future in our communities? Are we really saying that because you're serving a sentence of 6 months, say last year, that you shouldn't have any say in shaping your community in the future, in that future years? And then, are you saying in the same breath that the purpose of prison is also not just punitive, but also to rehabilitate people? If you believe a prison isn't simply about a punitive public need for punishment, if you like, but a means of rehabilitating people, you have to include people who are currently serving shorter sentences in prison in the electoral process. And we have to say that we believe you have a place in our society, and we want to give you that place in that society. It's a difficult argument to win with the Daily Mail, but I believe the sort of society that I want to create in Wales, and I believe we want to create in Wales, will recognise that we have to reach out and to argue the case for cohesion in our communities. And that means making the case for prisoners who will be released during the term of the council to be elected to be allowed to vote in the elections taking place for that. Now, I recognise that we have issues to address there in terms of connected address and how you actually exercise that right. I accept all of those issues, but those are issues of practical process. They're issues about how we deliver the policy. The purpose of the policy must be to ensure that people feel a part of the society to which they're going to return. And part of that cohesion is also saying, whatever your background, your nationality, if you're a part of this community and you pay council tax in this community, you should also have a right to vote. I had a meeting with the UK government just after my appointment in November, where it became clear to me halfway through the conversation that the United Kingdom government had promised during the Brexit negotiations certain rights, which I hadn't actually discussed with myself and the Scottish government. So a telephone call is organised very quickly. Minister, what do you think about EU citizens voting? Well, I'm very happy for my colleagues from the European mainland to vote in our elections if they're living in our communities. And in fact, if somebody is from whatever background or from whatever country, if they're living and contributing to our community, why shouldn't they vote in our elections? Again, we want to be inclusive and create communities which are inclusive and not exclusive, so that people are a part of shaping the future of where they live and where their families live. So we want to increase the franchise to enable more people to vote and to enable people to be a part of holding people like me to account. So how do we do that? Now, I use an electronic pen on an electronic notepad. No, that has advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantage at the moment is it's got 1% power left. It's a disadvantage for me, an advantage for you. But and I said, I don't see changing the way we vote as some sort of technical exercise alone. I see it as a means of enabling people to be a part of the process. I do all my banking on my telephone. Why can't I vote on my telephone? You know, no, I recognise there are issues about security and the rest of it that we need to address. And I recognise that you've got to get these things right, and you can't just simply put these systems into place without tests and without checking the security of it. But, you know, as a member of the Labour Party, we'll be taking part in an election for Deputy Leader in the next couple of weeks, and I guess that we'll be voting online for that. I voted in quite a few leadership elections recently, and I voted on my telephone in each individual one of them. And it makes sense, I think, that we do look at how we enable more people to vote. That also means we had a by-election last week on a Tuesday. Everybody working on a by-election thought it was an extraordinary thing that was, you know, was going to create all sorts of different problems. I don't know what you felt, Colin, but certainly those of us who were canvassing, we all thought, you know, we were all emphasising this is a Tuesday, this is a Tuesday. I'm not sure that the electorate saw the same importance in the day of the week as it happens. But I think, in terms of the political activists, I think need to recognise that for most people, voting isn't at the centre of their lives, what we want it to be, but it's something which we need to change to fit in with where people live. I would like to see more voting taking place on weekends, Saturdays or Sundays or Sundays. I don't understand why we simply have one day of voting, why we can't do it on more than one day. And if we are going to be voting electronically, we obviously need a national register as well. And how do we deliver that? Do we give a management of that to a particular organisation or a particular local authority to do on behalf of the whole of Wales? I don't know. Again, these are ways, debates that we need to have about the practical application and implementation of policy. For me, the principle is that we look at reaching out to people, we look at different ways of encouraging and enabling people to be a part of a political process, and that we look at how we can become more inclusive and to enable more people to hold people like me to account. But I also want us to be very clear about enabling people to stand for election. Now, I don't believe, for example, that somebody should be an assembly member and a local authority, principal local authority councillor. I've sat in the chamber many times, and as a minister, I've been questioned by members across the way who are also sitting local authority councillors, asking me about the policies of the council they're a member of. Now, to me, that's absurd, you know, and I perhaps haven't been at my most generous in some of my replies to some of those questions. But it's certainly, for me, a very clear conflict of interest between membership here and membership of a principal local authority. And I think we shouldn't enable that to happen. However, is it as true for should a council, somebody who's employed by a local authority, have to resign from that local authority before they stand for election? They might have to resign if they are elected, but how do we encourage more people to stand for election? How do we enable more people to stand for election? I'm interested in understanding that. Now, I can appreciate, as somebody who's been a manager in a previous life, but you wouldn't want somebody who's a member of your team who's also your boss in different ways, and I can see there being a conflict in some of those areas, and that's a conversation that we can have. But let's look at how we can encourage and enable more people to seek and stand for election. The final reform that we're looking at pursuing at the moment is to move local government onto the same 5-year term as this place and as Westminster. Now, as it happens, I think 4-year terms are actually long enough for any democratic institution. You know, we've got the Fixed Term Parliament Act in Westminster, which seems about effective as the old chocolate teapot. You know, it seems to me we've got a fixed term Parliament, except when Parliament doesn't want a fixed term Parliament, then have a general election. So I'm not sure how effective that is. I certainly feel, as somebody who's a member of this place before the last election, that 5 years is too long for an institution to go between elections. We should have 4-year terms. My own private personal view, which now Ffilmiwyd goes. Which I can see people in here, so I'm going to tell the trouble again. But if we do have 5-year terms here in Westminster, it's only right and proper the local government are elected on the same basis. So I do think we need to look at how we deliver that. The final permissive power we're looking at delivering through this particular reform is a move to permissive proportional representation. Now, again, this is an area which has been much debated and discussed, and I think empowering people means that votes have to count for something, and that means that votes have to elect somebody, and that means that proportional representation is, in my view, inherently fairer than first past the post. It's inherently a better system than first past the post, where you can have very, very big majorities or a minority of the vote. It is difficult, philosophically, to justify that, and I don't try and seek to do so. Now, at the moment, I think there are very different views on this. Many different views in the Labour Party. And in fact, there's one particular view in the Labour Party which is not that which I've just described. And I don't have a mandate to deliver proportional representation at the moment. Now, we're going to have a debate and discussion in the Labour Party about that. And my view will be that we should support a move to proportional representation, a move to STV. We have proportional representation here, and I think the way that we operate here in a proportional system means that this place has greater democratic legitimacy than if we simply run it on first past the post. And I think it'd be very difficult for anybody who's had experience of being in a National Assembly to argue that we should go to a first past the post election for National Assembly. I've never heard that argument made, and I don't expect to hear that argument made. So this institution was born with a proportional system, has worked with a proportional system, has delivered good governance, I think, through a proportional system, and there's no reason why other tiers of government are unable to do the same thing. And we are delivering that power to local authorities for them to take that decision. Now, I hope that we will be able to have a very rich and wide debate about how we empower people as a consequence of that. I believe that the more democratic debate we have, the better. The more holding to account of people like myself, the better. The more questioning of decisions that we take and we make, the better. And as a consequence of that, we will have better governance in an engaged society than in a disengaged society. And that means that we do need to look hard at not just making the technical changes that we seek to make to the electoral process and the process of managing and voting, but a much harder, more difficult debate about what happens the day before and the day after those elections. Because we also, I think, need to look hard at how we maintain a level of accountability between elections, so that you can't just be elected one particular week, disappear for 4 years, and then come back with a couple of very expensive leaflets and say, look what I've been doing, re-electing on the basis of that. We need to ensure that we do have more accountability between elections. Now, we're not making proposals on this at the moment, but I'm interested to have that debate and that discussion. At the moment, too much accountability is sometimes done by social media, which doesn't always reflect the views, certainly not the tone that you'd have of debate elsewhere. And some of the changes we've seen in the political debate through social media, I don't think have been particularly to be welcomed. And certainly some of the stuff that I've seen both AMs, MPs and councillors receive, the sort of abuse they've received on social media, I don't think is acceptable in any democratic society. Because part of being a democratic society, of course, is we reject the rule of the mob. Let's be absolutely clear about that. And democracy is about an informed democracy and not just a vitriolic democracy. Let's be clear about that as well. So those are some of the proposals that we're making at the moment, the background to them and the purpose of them. But the point I want to leave you with this evening is that this democratic renewal and democratic reform should not be seen in isolation. It's part of a process of renewal and reform. It's part of a way that we reinvent our democracy for the 21st century. It's about refounding our democracy in some ways. It's about ensuring that we have the fundamentals in place to enable an informed political debate. And then, to answer Tony Benn's question, who is able to get rid of me? The answer has to be everybody in Blaenau Gwent and everybody in Wales.